our Dropbox office in San Francisco. I'm originally from New Orleans, so this accent is not a California accent. And I manage research for our product growth team. And today I'm going to talk to you about presenting things that you discover about your users. This is my son, Finley. And like the character he's dressed up as, Clark Kent, also known as Superman, he can be a man of mystery. I have discovered in my first year as a parent that parenthood is 99% figuring out what your children are telling you they want and deciphering it to understand what they actually need. So I made a list of all of the things Finley indicated he wanted a couple of weekends ago. He wanted to throw his blocks. He wanted my bagel. He wanted to only be held, to not be held at all. He wanted to sit on my lap and not sit on my lap. But the thing was, these might have been his wants, but they weren't his needs. What he actually needed was to understand how to play with his toys, and he needed to discover what I had. He needed some independence, but not too much independence. And I could have spent my morning running around and giving him everything he indicated he wanted, but it wouldn't have actually satisfied him because I would not have addressed his root satisfaction. My role was to understand what the drivers were that were causing him to display those wants. And you might not have a toddler at home, but you all have people that use your products and services. And your role as a designer or a researcher is to understand what are their goals, what are their needs, and what are their motives. What are the things that are driving them to say, I want X, Y, Z from your product? And when you understand those, that's when you're actually going to be able to build things that have lasting value to your users. Now, you probably spend a lot of your time doing this already. We tend to spend most of our time discovering what our users need and then a little bit of time figuring out how we're going to share those needs with our stakeholders. But I would argue that understanding how to share those findings effectively with the people that you work with is actually incredibly critical to your work because research findings are only as good as they are communicated. You can have a great plethora of findings, but if you're not able to communicate it in a way that brings it to life and helps your stakeholders understand what you have discovered and empathize with the people that you've spoken with, then those findings are not going to necessarily be worthwhile because they won't necessarily be implemented. So I want to help show you today ways that you can share those findings because it's really important that you bring those findings to life so that they can live on without you as their guardian for a couple of reasons. Number one, you might not be the product decision maker. You might not be the person that's actually going to make a decision of whether or not those findings are implemented. And you're not always going to be in the room for every conversation. You can't possibly be in the room for every product conversation. You also need to build advocates for your work. People that, when you're not in the room, are going to be able to say, this is important because we have received this feedback, because we understand this about our users. So this is a very popular Jacob Nielsen quote where he basically says, you are not your user. You know, even if you've used your product personally before you started working on it, even if you continue to use your product, I used Dropbox before I worked at Dropbox. Before Dropbox, I worked at Medium, and I used Medium as a writer and reader tons of times. But the minute I started working for Medium and for Dropbox, I became atypical. I am not their user anymore. And one of the most effective ways to reiterate that we are not our users is to be able to tell the story of who our users are and what their needs are. So I'm going to share with you 4 ways to do this, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So the different ways that I'm going to share with you today I picked for a couple of reasons. Number one, you will not see reports on this list. I wanted to talk about things that go beyond a Microsoft Word document, or in our case, a Dropbox paper doc. And I wanted to talk to you about methods that are a little bit more creative. They really bring your findings to life, and they allow you to get your team involved in a really interesting way. They're also flexible, so if you're a team of one, they can be done with a team of one. They can be done on a small budget as well as a larger budget or with a larger team. So let's talk about workshops first. So how many of you here in the room have done like co-design workshops with your design team? Like you've done, awesome. So you're familiar with design sprints, co-design workshops. They are effective because they allow space for your team to come together and create, ideate, and imagine. Those same pros are also effective in helping you share your research findings. So they provide a creative space for you to dig into the design possibilities that your findings could bring about. They also give your team the chance to be involved in a meaningful way. So let's talk about what a workshop to share your findings would look like. So first of all, it should include a few things. Number one, it should include space to encourage creativity. So effective workshops often include activities where you're going to be role-playing, or where you're going to ask the team to imagine designing something where the confines of your day-to-day job are not necessarily coming into play. And so effective workshops give you that space and freedom. They also, of course, should include defined goals and outcomes. So when you're inviting your stakeholders to participate in a workshop, you need to tell them what you're expecting of them and what they can expect to get out of it. And you also want to include activities that build empathy. We'll talk about that in a minute. And finally, you want to include very clearly what the next steps are for those teams. So oftentimes you're going to be inviting people in who are not on your design team, who maybe do not work with research or design directly on like a day-to-day basis. So you want to help them understand what the next steps are going to be after you hold your workshop. So I want to give you an example. So we held a round of research a few months ago, and after we synthesized all of the findings, we wanted to share our findings with different people, and so we decided to plan a workshop. So we created first user story cards, and on our user story cards we included quotes from the research, a couple of bullet points about our findings, and a summary of what the user needs were. And then we invited people to participate. We had product managers, designers, marketing managers, engineers coming into the room. We paired them up, and we had them look at a user story card. And as they internalized it and started to become familiar with the user needs, we then held How Might We sessions, which I'm sure most of you have heard about before, where they designed different possibilities based on how they might meet those user needs. Now, the goal of that workshop wasn't the design explorations. It wasn't the how might we's. The goal of that workshop was to bring those user needs to life and to really get those people to internalize them. And so when they walked out of the room, they were excited because, number one, they understand the user needs a lot better than had I just gone in there and given a PowerPoint presentation. And two, they were excited to start actually working on something that would help meet these user needs. So in that aspect, workshops are an incredibly creative way for you to bring those findings to life. And I just wanted to include another example. So you are going to be inviting people in who maybe don't work with workshops very often. They might not be part of a design team that's familiar with a design sprint. And so one thing that we do is we begin every workshop with a pair of suspenders. Like we literally have a pair of suspenders in the room, and we call them our Suspend Your Belief suspenders. And all it does is give people the freedom to think outside of the confines of their everyday job and know that it's okay to put yourself fully in the minds of your users for the next X amount of time that your workshop will be held in. So the next method is something we call exhibit pop-ups. So it's a lot like an art exhibit where you're going to actually display artifacts from your research. So think about here in the Design Museum when you're walking around the different exhibits, you're looking at them, you're really distilling them, you're discovering what that exhibit, the effect that it has on you, what it means to you. You're taking that same premise and applying it to your research. And the reason why it's such an effective method is because, one, it allows people to really distill and reflect on your findings, and two, it opens your research up to more people. So a couple of months ago, we did a research project in Japan. And we came back to San Francisco, we synthesized our findings, we shared it with our immediate stakeholders, but we wanted to open it up to all of Dropbox. So we held an exhibit pop-up displaying our Japanese findings. And what we did is we booked a shared room in the Dropbox office. We printed out photos from the trip, quotes from our research. We blew up and printed out the bullet points from our research. And because it was findings from our trip in Japan, we also had sake cocktails and some slippers for people to change into as they came into the room. And what that did is it opened up the research to more people than would have originally just been involved in it. This is an example of one of the pieces of findings art that we printed out and we had on the wall. And it facilitated great discussion because it got people involved who would have not normally been involved in research, who don't sit close to research, our design, our product at all. And it really brought it to life in a way that wouldn't have necessarily been brought to life if we had just presented it in a normal presentation fashion. And then the next method that I want to talk to you about is collateral. And by that I mean physical collateral. Collateral is just physical artifacts of your research takeaways, and I brought some examples. And the reason why I love using collateral to bring your findings to life is because it creates this top-of-mind reminder. In other words, you are sending your stakeholders back to their desk with a physical reminder of what your findings are. So when they are sitting at their desk working and they don't have your doc open or your PowerPoint presentation open, your findings are still there in front of them. What I also love about this is it can be personalized to your own office culture. So you might not have an office that really encourages like posters. So putting something on the wall isn't maybe necessarily an option. What collateral allows you to do is create a physical artifact of your research that can be just as small as needed. Or if your office does allow you to print out posters, you can go big. You can print out posters and put them all over the wall. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The first one that I created were stickers. I had a round of research a couple of months ago that had 5 main takeaways. And so I worked with my designer to come up with an illustration that represented each takeaway. And then I had stickers printed out. So these are some examples. This is one of the takeaways. So after I presented my findings, I gave all of the people in the room a sticker to bring back with them, and they put them on their computer, they put them on their desk. It was in front of them. So I'm not in the San Francisco office today with my team, but the sticker of that finding is, and it's in their desk. And so as they're working and as they're thinking about the product roadmap and the different features that we might be creating in the near future, that finding is in front of them and they're going to be reflecting on it when they start making decisions. Another thing that we do that's pretty common and easy are just flashcards. This one has the title of the findings. I have a quote on one side and the takeaway on the other that I have labeled as an opportunity. And I just make them flashcards and I hand them out to my stakeholders as well. And again, this is something that they can have at their desk. Other things that we've done, magnets. I printed out magnets of personas that we created, and I put them on the refrigerator at the office. I actually put them in the bathroom stalls, so they're really in front of people. And of course, you can do more traditional posters that you can put up on the wall. The point of it is that whatever you do, you're just creating that physical reminder of your findings that your team can have in front of them at all times, so that it's not reliant on them bringing up a doc or on even you being in the room. And the last method that I want to talk about is something called brown bags. And the reason why I included this is because it's the closest to a traditional presentation, and it's also one of the most flexible methods. So in other words, you can do it on zero budget. You can do it as a team of one or a team of many. It's just incredibly easy. Every one of you in the room should be able to hold a brown bag of your findings. And much like a presentation, it's you presenting your findings, but it's meant for you to think about creating a more casual environment to do so in. So because it's a brown bag, we often hold them over lunch, or we hold them in the afternoon. Dropbox has snack time in the afternoon, and so we'll hold them during snack time. And what they do is they ask very little of your attendees. So unlike a formal presentation where it's a meeting during outside of lunch hours, you're not asking your attendees to do very much except to come, bring their food, listen to you talk. But you also include more time and space for discussion. So it's meant to be a much more casual setting. So you're meant to include in it time to facilitate that discussion. This is an example of a brown bag that we held a couple of weeks ago. We did research on how people find and search for their files. And so we called it a retrieval party brainstorm. In reality, the brainstorm wasn't the point of the brown bag. We just wanted it to be a fun, casual way for people to come and hear our findings and then chat about them. We held a fiesta theme. And as you can see, unlike a regular presentation, it's not somebody standing at the front of the room and people sitting in front of you. We had people sit in a circle with their lunch on couches or in chairs that were in a circle as we chatted about it. And because it was a casual setting, people that normally would have dismissed it as, I don't know if this applies to me, or I don't have time to attend this meeting because I have 50 other meetings. It was much easier for people to be part of. Again, we heavily emphasized that it was during lunch, so people actually had time. They brought their lunch to the meeting. It was a very low stakes way of having people in the room. And because it was very casual and because there was discussion involved, it brought about deeper discussion than maybe would have traditionally been involved if we were just giving a presentation. So those are 4 different methods that I really like because they bring findings to life, but I'm going to share with you a couple more. So I wanted to share with you a couple more methods that I like to use when you're in certain situations. So first of all, you might be working with a lot of stakeholders from various different parts of your company. One thing that I love to do is something I call a mid-synthesis match the quote activity. And the reason why I like this method is because it actually helps make your job a little bit easier as well. And what this does is you simply, after you've completed your research and you have, say, all of the raw quotes from your users, you print out those quotes, you invite your stakeholders in, and you have them do the synthesis. You have them look at the quotes and start finding patterns. Or you have them look at the quotes and match those quotes to the insights you're starting to see. Number one, it helps do some of the work for you, and 2, it really does help bring those quotes, bring those findings to life for those people. So by the time they get to your final report, they're going to feel like they are much more knowledgeable about what you're sharing. Maybe you've got a lengthy project with lots of different activities. It's not just one or two methods involved. I like to do something I call dispatches from the field. So instead of beginning a research project and telling your team, I'm beginning this project and I should have it wrapped up in 4 weeks or a month or longer, you're going to actually share your insights as they're emerging with your team. So along the way, you're taking them along the journey with you. And the thing about this is it doesn't have to be super baked research insights. It's going to be emerging insights. So maybe a couple of quotes from interviews that you found particularly interesting, are 1 or 2 insights that emerged from a couple of days of diary study. You're just sharing these insights along the way, keeping your team involved. And again, just like the mid-synthesis match the quote activity, by the time you get to your final insights that you're sharing with them, they're going to feel a lot more bought in to what you're sharing. And finally, maybe you're working with teams in multiple locations. So even though Dropbox's headquarters are in San Francisco, we have offices all over the world and oftentimes work with teams spread out in various locations. A highlight reel is always something that you can do that is very effective. Videos are, of course, a great way to build empathy because you're hearing it straight from your user or you're watching them use your product. Doing a highlight reel around a particular insight or a particular theme that has emerged and sending the link to your stakeholders is a great way to share those insights. And it's a really good thing to do when you have people that aren't all in your office and maybe won't be physically present in your presentation. So discovering user needs is really about entering their world. It's about you getting out from behind your desk and diving into methods that put you in the mind of your user. But sharing those needs is really about bringing their world to life. And the way that you are going to build empathy among your team and help them understand that the feedback you have received is valuable is about bringing that feedback to life. And when you're able to do that, that's when you're going to see decision makers implementing your findings into actual product changes, which at the end of the day is what we are all trying to strive for. So thank you so much. I'll take questions now.